Welcome to the Combat Intelligent Athlete Show, where we talk and punch our way through achieving peak performance on the mat, surviving the streets, and how to take on the martial arts of everyday life and win. And now, here is your host, Coach Rodney King.
So, as I normally start with everybody that I'm talking to is just getting a little bit of a feel, a background, right? So your martial art background in, just a brief version of it, because of course, if people want to know more, they can jump online, they can go find out more about you. But, a lot of people listening to this may not know who you are. So as a good starting point, give everybody a brief background on your martial art history.
My first exposure to martial arts was in '64 when I saw Bruce Lee and the Green Hornet. I didn't take a martial arts lesson until '69 when I happened across a judo program that was nearby my house in a gym. And I would sit in on the classes because they didn't teach kids, and the instructors would invite me afterwards when they were done training and teach me to roll and break falls and such. And then I started formal martial arts training where I was actually enrolled in classes in '71 in a taekwondo program that was a school in our community. And I trained all the way up to first degree black belt 8 years later, age 19. And then I was kind of ready to do something new. And I had been seeing Ernie Reyes, who was a famous teacher, his team competing and performing at events. So I packed my stuff on my motorcycle and moved from Reno to San Jose and joined with Ernie Reyes and became a part of his performance troupe. And we did films and TV and performances all over. And the training was really intense. And the talent in the dojo was amazing. I think when I joined, we had 7 of the top 10 forms competitors in the United States as rated by Karate Illustrated magazine, working out in this small school, with maybe 100 members. And after a couple of years there, I was starving, and so I moved back to Reno because my family had a business that I could work in. And I opened the first Ernie Reyes West Coast martial arts outside of the Bay Area, and learned a lot about being a martial artist by becoming a teacher. And when I first moved back to Reno, there was nothing there, and I called Mr. Reyes, said, "Hey, I'm going to move back." And he said, No, stay, start teaching. You'll learn so much. You'll be thanking me someday. Because I just wanted to be a student. In 1994, I was having some hip issues, and I thought, I've got to find something else to do. Unbeknownst to me, I'd have my hips replaced in a few years, but I started to pass on the schools to my staff members, many who had been with me for 10 years or longer, and I relocated to the big island of Hawaii. And but prior to going there, I took some jiu-jitsu classes from Half and Cesar Gracie, and I became addicted to jiu-jitsu. That was about 22 years ago, and I've been doing Brazilian jiu-jitsu ever since. 22 years. I'm still a brown belt, but I had my hips replaced at age 40, and then 2 years ago, I was getting ready to fight in the Senior Master Worlds, and I noticed in the brackets one of my guys was a judo champion, so I said, I better get my stand-up game down, get ready and pull guard and all that. And in the process of that, I spiral fractured my right femur in training and had to get a third hip put in. And was able to rehab myself and fight the next year and took a third place in just 12 months to the day after breaking my leg. But I still practice 3 or 4 times a week, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. It's about all I can handle. I'll be 58 this year. I cross-train in yoga, and I've had an eclectic martial arts background. Ernie Reyes was a very eclectic teacher, so there was judo and wushu and eskrima and all sorts of things. And I'm still a practicing martial arts, but my primary work is I help other instructors learn how to better their game, mentally, physically, socially, financially. And that's what I do now. Is I'm still deeply involved in the martial arts, but not as a school owner, but as a teacher of school owners.
Wow, that's amazing. I mean, just listening to that and just the tenacity in itself, just being able to come back after all those injuries and still being involved, my hat's off to you. But I thought where it'd be a good point to start is considering that you have had such a long history in martial arts. How would you say martial arts has changed, if at all? I mean, both, I guess, the positive and the negative side, since you began, and especially as you were, a black belt at 19 and started teaching.
Well, I think the martial arts has changed dramatically. I think everybody listening to this would agree if they have been around the martial arts community, but I think it's changed for the better. I think that YouTube, for example, has dramatically changed the quality of martial arts, because when I was a kid, the martial arts were like cults, like a sect, and you kept your information really close to you, and you didn't have a lot of exposure to other martial arts unless you went to tournaments. Well, now my son, for example, Keenan Cornelius, Keenan's a top jiu-jitsu champion. I think that he learned more jiu-jitsu from YouTube than he did from his coaches. And I think today he uses YouTube and video, the ease of video production, to raise the quality and standards of martial arts taught all over the world. I mean, he has thousands of subscribers to his online program. So that the ability to make video, to study video, to see somebody do something amazing and be able to play it in slow motion and 40 or 50 times if you need to see it that often, has given everybody better standards. It's opened the door to what other people are doing, their methodology and the quality of their technique, and what works and what doesn't. And you get to hear all these diverse opinions and see all these things that you would never have seen when I was a kid. When I would read Black Belt or Karate Illustrated, and the way they would illustrate techniques was, first frame was this back fist, second frame he was starting to reach, third frame he was, that was the best we had. So in that way, we have a much more diverse, eclectic, quality level of increased quality of instruction and visual learning and instructional learning that takes place via that. So for that, we've had a quantum leap. I think jiu-jitsu from South America, as opposed to what was being passed from Japan and Korea and other countries that we all were heavily influenced by when I first started. I think the Brazilians brought something very healthy to the work. Instead of the militaristic, linear approach of the Japanese, where it was the hierarchy in the classroom and there was a really heavy discipline, which I enjoyed, and I think it has value. The Brazilians came in and it was like, oh, my friend, let's do this and that. It was, these guys were still killers, but they brought an informality to the mat, which I felt, in the contrast of how I learned, was very refreshing and very friendly and a good learning environment. So that blend of the heat of South America with the rigidity of these, militaristic cultures, and it's just a nice blend. So that change has been good for the martial arts. And then I think the fact that the UFC having, how many years did we debate, how would, karate do against judo? And, we talked about it endlessly, but we never, very rarely got in the ring and just saw how it all came out. And the UFC, the first time we all saw Royce beating all these big guys, we all went out and started jiu-jitsu, everybody. And that thing that jiu-jitsu has brought, it's a revitalization of, actual physical effort. If I'm a 7th degree under Ernie Reyes in Taekwondo, and when I do testing, or when I do Taekwondo testing or karate testing, you do some board breaking, you do some prearranged sparring, you do some forms, you might do some free sparring, but you can fake it. Like, I can get around the reality of it. But in jiu-jitsu, I have to go out there and beat that, 300-pound blue belt, and you can't fake that. And that essence of the struggle and the reality of that and the way it humbles you and that you can't fake your way around it, that's brought it's just transformed. And it's not new. I mean, jiu-jitsu is not new, but for some reason we abandoned that for a long time, and it was sidelined, and now it's taken over again. And I really appreciate it as a martial artist, what it does for me in my practice and my mindset.
Oh, absolutely, and I totally agree. I mean, that's kind of what put me onto the path, especially in jiu-jitsu, watching Royce Gracie in the early UFCs. And, now I've been a black belt for quite some time, and I'm still involved in Brazilian jiu-jitsu. So I definitely get where you're coming from as far as that's really opened, I guess, people's eyes to the reality of what actually works. And as you noted, for a very long time, that was kind of hidden. And I think part of it, as you suggest, was that we didn't have access, right? We didn't have access like we do today, where we can go up on YouTube and so forth and actually get to see different people positioning themselves in such a way that they're teaching the techniques. And so if you are discerning enough, you can make a decision on what on face value seems to work and what doesn't. But ultimately, you can also go down, get on the mat and try it out.
Yeah, well, I just made this example the other day. I was talking about the distinctions of writers. There's so many genre in writing. There's science writing and science fiction writing and mystery writing and personal essay and historical fiction. We don't even blink at this. We tend to gravitate, I think, towards the kind of reading we like. Like I like historical fiction, and I like essays, and I like magical realism in fiction. And we don't put down or look at other genres of writing as less than. There are just a lot of different divisions. And I think the martial arts is like that. There are MMA schools. There are schools that focus on performance art and tricking and, competitive jiu-jitsu. And there are schools that follow the teachings of certain teachers like O-sensei or, Funakoshi or whatever. And they're all full of value. They all have something to bring to the table. And they may not be your cup of tea, but they're not less than or greater than. They just have different emphasis, and they still allow you a personal journey. They still affect your physiology. They still promote functional range of movement. And there are all these benefits that all martial arts bring. There's this TED talk of this woman who talks about the power of body language and posture. It's been seen millions and millions of times. And when I was watching that TED Talk, and she was talking about how she gets people to kind of carry themselves with their chest out and kind of the superhero pose and what it does to their brain chemistry, I thought, well, that's traditional forms, where all the movements that I grew up with were exaggerated, and you had hyper posture, and you were reaching out, and it was all the elements of what she was talking about that she's doing with adults to affect their psychology. And it was built in the martial arts. That was happening. We were doing power moves, and we were, yelling and creating, powerful body language, but we didn't recognize that it was also affecting our psychology, maybe not overtly. We all experienced it, but there's great value in that. And so when you hear people arguing about whether kata is realistic or isn't realistic, or whether it works in a fight or not, there's another value to it, that you're teaching these young people or you're practicing as an adult these postures that seriously affect your confidence through, measurable brain activity and chemistry. And there's a lot of value in that has nothing to do with fighting. It's just about being a higher functioning human being, healthy and dynamic.
One of the things that has happened definitely over the last decade has been a shift towards this functional approach, really looking at what actually works in unarmed combat, be that as a combat athlete or even in the reality-based self-defense space. And so that's kind of where I see a lot of people moving to. So my question would be, based on what we've been talking about, and of course there's the positive aspect of how the martial arts world has changed, as you discussed, do you think, at least from your perspective, that there's anything that we need to be concerned about? This, especially when we talk about potentially a focus that's almost, completely towards hyper competition, where competition becomes the beginning and end of everything. Is there something to be concerned about if that is the only thing that people are focusing on in their martial art experience?
Well, I think I look at the martial arts as a process of of evolution and aging. Like, there are times in your life when all you care about is taking care of your family or making a buck, or, you're driven by these motivations that are sometimes age specific. It's a coming of age. It's part of your journey. And then as you age, or as you suffer the ups and downs of, life, you change, you evolve, and your focus evolves. And what was important to you before almost means nothing, but you're still alive, you're still functioning. You just have other values and other measures of whether you're being successful, and is this how you want to spend your time. So there's a certain part of that martial arts evolution where I'm afraid, and I want to be able to protect myself, and I don't want any bullshit. So is this work or doesn't it work? And then there's a time maybe when you're confident. Okay, I know it works. So why else am I here? What else is there that's happening? And maybe you start to focus on art and beauty and movement, or maybe like me, you have some physical struggle, and so just having functional mobility becomes worth all the training. You say, well, I know how to defend myself. I've been artistic, but right now I'm getting on 60, and I want to have a high functioning physical body. And so this training helps me stay mobile, helps me stay young. And so you value that. And I don't care about tournaments anymore. But there was a time when I lived for tournaments, right? And I think when I hear these fighters who, full contact fighters, or young people who, are braggarts, or they're overtly hyper masculine, and I just think, that's just youth. They'll get their lessons handed to them at some point, and these things that matter so much to them now won't matter so much anymore. So it's not that approach is less than or greater than the approach of an older, more seasoned person. Everybody has a place at the table. And there's value in and contribution to be made by the 20-year-old who's deeply involved in his or her own physicality and stretching the limits of what their body can do. And there's great value in the grizzled veteran who's had his hips replaced and his knee is out, has torn his Achilles, but he brings to the table this experience and this point of view. And if there's a danger in any of this, it's that we don't give value to the young, experimental, prodigies of the martial arts who break the rules and try new things, or we don't give value to the people who maybe aren't physically impressive anymore, but bring this point of view of life and death. And I often tell instructors, I said, you become a far better instructor when you've been injured, because you come back with a real sense of the fragility of your body. And so you're more sensitive and compassionate to what's going on the floor, and you're more careful. And the other thing, too, is when you've had children. Before when I was teaching kids, and I taught thousands of them before I had my own children, I just thought I knew everything about what parents should do and what they shouldn't. And then when I had my own child, I went, oh, okay. It was a realization. It was like a whole universe opened up. And I wanted to call every parent I'd ever given any advice to and apologize, because I had no idea how it felt, the connection between you and this young person on the mat or in life, and how scared you were and how concerned and how you lived vicariously through them. And so just by having a child, it was a quantum leap in growth as a teacher. And I'll joke to instructors when I'm teaching seminars, I'll say, who here doesn't have kids? And they'll get a certain amount of hands raised. And I'll say, well, go out and procreate and then come back to the class, because that one thing will make you such a better teacher. So that was a roundabout way to answer your question, but everybody has a place at the table and should respect each other and try to understand that there are many ways that we interact and teach, and that everybody has something of value to give, even if they're blind. You cannot appreciate like I used to teach 50-year-olds when I was 20, and I had no idea what they were going through. And I'd call those guys too and apologize, but they're all dead. And so, you just have to go through the experience, and everybody has something. I don't discount young people who are pushing the envelope because they can sometimes be so far ahead of their time. I just watched a film on Van Gogh the other day, and it reminded us that he did 800 paintings in 8 years, and he didn't start painting until he started painting. He had no formal education, and he died at age 37. Bruce Lee died at age 32. Sometimes young people bring something to the table that has nothing to do with how long they've been on the planet. It's something to do with their way of looking at things and their brain chemistry, I guess. And so everybody has something of value to give. Now, did that answer the question we were addressing?
Well, there's two things that stood out for me there. I think you're right. This being my experience is that there definitely is a maturing into the martial arts, and what you placed a focus on, say 2 decades ago, is completely different, especially for myself now going into my 40s. And so my perspective has changed. What I want out of the experience has changed. So in that sense, that makes perfect sense. The other side of that would be, I agree, that, as a coach myself and dealing with young people, I see myself in them at that age. And so I get that they want to test themselves. They want to put themselves out there. They want to see what they're made of. I think the only thing that I kind of, caution myself about is that when I was coming up as a youngster, I never felt that I had really good coaches around me that took me through that experience in a way that I could feel that was really healthy and life-affirming. It was almost like they saw that pit bull in me and they used it to their advantage. So there's that part of me that's concerned about that. And I think especially for us, as the older coaches, our role as mentors, as the wise men, as guides, is really important. And I take that part of my role very seriously. I want the young person to be able to explore themselves fully, and I would never stand in their way from competing on whatever that may be. But I want to at least feel that at the same time that I'm helping them navigate potentially stuff that's coming up or has a potential to come up because of their history, and allow them to engage with it in a positive way so that, for example, either A, they don't want to compete anymore, or maybe they have a kind of run of losses that they now don't just, spiral into the darkness and they're unable to get out of it.
Yeah, well, the thing about how I've become a teacher, like I have this thing that you may have or may not have heard before. So when I first started teaching, I knew I was a good teacher because I could kick your butt. Nobody could beat me. That was obviously I'm a good teacher because I can wipe you out. And then there was another measure as I got a little older, and I said, well, look at my students. My students are winning all the tournaments. Obviously, I'm a good teacher. Just look at my students. Then I grew up a little more, and then I went, well, look at the size of my academy and look at my revenue. Look at the car I'm driving out there. I mean, I've got 800 students. Obviously, that's a sign that I'm a good teacher. And then I went through another evolution, and I realized that's not the measure of a good teacher alone. Their physical skills, the skills of their students, the size of their academy, and their ability to retain students. The real measure became how my students were taking what we were practicing on the mat and applying it in their lives. And I started to recognize that the highest evolution of a teacher, or as I've perceived it today, was not in what took place on the floor, but what took place as a result of what we practiced on the floor. And somebody I was married to, not married to anymore, but she had a bottom line me one time, and I was bragging about my black belts, this young group that had come through, like we all have, who were just extraordinary. And I was bragging about them, and she said, yeah, but look at them today. And one was a bartender, and one was doing this, and one had gone off to sniper school, and they're struggling with their relationships and struggling in their careers, and I couldn't deny it that they hadn't really transferred that excellence that we had on the mat yet into their lives, and it made me look at what I did, and I said, you're right. If I were teaching them again today, with the perspective that I have today, and the understanding of what we really struggle with in the world. It wouldn't have been about their competition or their kicking. That I would have had another factor. I would have taught them some other things and prepared them for the struggles that I knew were coming. But I didn't know it then. And so I just taught what I knew. And I think that's that's the essence of teaching, is you only teach what you know. You can't really teach what you don't know. And so it behooves instructors to expand their knowledge and their viewpoint. And a lot of that comes from the people you hang out with, not necessarily just physically, but emotionally. Like my peer group are people like Thich Nhat Hanh and Ernie Reyes and Jun Rhee and Maya Angelou. And, you bring these people into your life as teachers and peers. And that has a lot to do with your viewpoint and where you come back to the mat and how you guide the next generation. And without exposure to those, I know a lot of instructors whose main peer group are people who are obsessed with accumulating wealth. And that becomes a real important part of their life. And that becomes often the focus for a while. And that has a consequence. So I tell kids, be very careful about who you hang out with, because it can have such a huge impact on your viewpoint, your goals, your attitude. And so I think in the martial arts community, making sure that we don't buy into the myths that we have, that we keep it real, that we have goals that are not just for the mats and for the ring, but that we do what we say we can do, which is, every single school that I know of, regardless of their style, have a pitch. And it's often very similar, and it involves courtesy and integrity, perseverance, respect, self-control, and all these things that we profess to teach. But we often have very little evidence. We're a promise-based community. We make lots of promises. The guy opens a school down the street. He's half your age. His dad funds him into the school. He's going to make the exact same promises that the veteran makes, because there's no evidence required. And so I'm helping instructors to look at their teaching to move from a promise-based format, a promise-based industry or business, to an evidence-based. If you're an architect or an artist, a graphic artist, you sell your work based upon your portfolio. This is what the kind of work I do. This is the medium I work in. This is the quality of the work. And people look at it and say, yeah, I think you'd be perfect for this particular job. But in the martial arts community, we don't create that evidence, or maybe it's based around trophies or rewards. That's a certain kind of evidence. But for all these other things that we say we do, we build more confident children, or we do this or that, we don't accumulate evidence. And just the act of starting to say, okay, I'm going to start looking for how this work on the mat is affecting our community through these people that I'm training, and telling those stories and accumulating them in a project portfolio. I could see schools of the future selling their lessons not based on promises, but something like this, where the pitch is, well, Mrs. Johnson, what I do for a living is I teach people to take what we're practicing on the mat, what we work on so diligently, and apply it to their lives and to the community they live in, but outside of the realm of kicking or punching people or choking them or throwing them. Let me give you some examples. And those examples would be a sizable and growing portfolio of the real stories of how that 9-year-old's taken courtesy to the next level, or they formed a project that had this in mind and what it meant in reference to the community and how you affected their work. And you'll have actual, stories about how your work works, and we'll sell our lessons based on that. And you'll have less people making promises that they aren't fulfilling based on, hyperbole or hype. And you'll have more people say, well, this is what I really do for a living. Here's the evidence. And so that's kind of a competition-based thing, we have 7 world champions. Well, that gains with it a certain credibility. But my thing as a teacher has gone from cultivating martial arts champions to cultivating change makers. I think I want to produce change makers. To begin with the end in mind, I seek to use the training, the vehicle of martial arts, to create people who know how to make change in their own lives, in the lives of those in their sphere of influence, in the community. And when I start seeing evidence of people being change makers, I feel like I've done the best work that I can do.
I love that. I mean, in a similar vein, that's what I'm trying to do with my own programs and with my own trainers, and we talk about this a lot. I guess my question is, because there's a lot of people that are going to be listening to this that are in the process or already teaching martial arts, and if they came to you, where would be a good starting point with that person, man? Where would you start with them to help them understand, just what you've been talking about so far?
Well, I think I remember being in psychology class and the teacher doing this drill, and maybe you've gone through it. I'm sure many of the people listening, they say, well, look around the room and count everything that's blue. And so you look around the room and you start keeping maybe even tabulated on a pad. And then the instructor says, okay, how many green things did you saw? You didn't see anything green because you were looking for blue. I think when you start looking for evidence that your program is affecting your community, that it's affecting the life of the student. The way I figured this out was roundabout, but one of the things that I learned from Jun Rhee, Grandmaster Jun Rhee is a famous taekwondo guy out of Washington, D.C., he's a friend of Bruce Lee, invented safety gear that we use today and all that. Jun Rhee, we were working on this project and together, and I asked him, I said, do you think we could get Chuck Norris to help us with this? And he said, yeah, I think he could, but we'll have to ask him when he can't say no. And he said, by the way, if you ever really want something, you have to get the person you're going to ask into a position where they can't say no to you. And that's because you've done so much for them that they just simply can't say no. And when I started selling martial arts lessons and then asking people to buy more lessons or a new program, and I started getting no's, I realized, well, I hadn't put them yet in a position where they couldn't say no to me. So instead of looking to make the sale, I started looking prior to the sale as how can I affect this person's life so dramatically that when I ask them for something which I consider to be rather small, that there's no way they can say no to me. And it caused me to become a teacher whose intention was to go out and make a difference in this person's life. So I had to get to know them better, and I had to pay attention to more than just their technique, because I knew they could. I often have parents who come in, and I knew their kid was an angel on the mat, but I had no idea what they were doing at home. And I'd get this, crossed-armed, kind of looking at me like, what are you going to try to sell me? And I recognized immediately I hadn't affected this kid's behavior at home yet. The room's not clean, this behavior with the sister, the words they're saying, the way they're behaving. I've got to get into that realm if I want these parents to come in and buy whatever it is that I'm going to try to sell them. I want that. I want them to come in saying, I don't know what it's going to cost. I don't care. Here's a check. What do you want from me? I love the work you're doing, And I realized that, for some parents, what I was doing on the mat was enough, but it wasn't enough to keep the students as many students as I wanted to, or to make a big impact. So it put the onus on me to raise my standard and say, I don't just want people who are proficient on the mat. I want people who take this work and it affects their life in such a positive way that there's no denying. And when I ask them to help me with something, they're not saying, well, how much is it? I'm just saying, how can I help? How can I serve you? And I think that the instructor who's listening to this, who starts looking for social proof, like, show me that 9-year-old you're teaching for the last year and show me anything that they've done that represents the things you say you teach, but off the mat. Has it made the community better? Are they higher functioning in their relationships? Has their family been affected by what they do? And when I ran this program called the Ultimate Black Belt Test, it was an experimental black belt testing program where a bunch of my friends and I adopted all these eccentric testing requirements that were uncommon or never done in the martial arts, but to see what would happen. It occurred to me that the best way to determine whether a test was as profound as I thought it should be would not be measured simply on the performance of the tester. You could almost black dot the tester out, like just put a big black dot over the person themselves, like a black hole, and only measure the effect of the test on the people in that person's sphere of influence. Then I could determine, like, it's not enough to have a good athlete. It's not enough to have somebody who can kick ass. It's not enough to do that. I want to have an experience that's so profound that all the people in your sphere of influence are affected. Their diets have improved. They're being more diligent and compassionate and kind, and you've viscerally affected their lives. Now we've got a black belt test, because I've seen it done. I saw Ernie Reyes do his tests, where he tested for 5th and 6th and 7th, and he would affect thousands of people through his process. And I thought, now that's a test. It's not just about you, my friend. It's about everybody you live with. In effect, it's about your community. Show me a test that's like that, and you're going to put me in a place where I can't say no. Because I've seen a lot of tests where it's all about how many boards this person can break, or how high they can kick, or how many trophies they've won, which all has merit. But is that all there is? Aren't we capable of more? What's the difference between our potential and what we're actually doing? And so I look at the martial arts and say, well, we're doing this and we're doing some of it really good, but what else could we do? And that comes back to the people that you hang out with. Like, look at Malala, for example. This gal got shot in the head. She's a teenager, and she has nothing. And yet she was able to accomplish so much. When you look at what she's done in the world and how she's used her life experiences to make good things, and then you look at all the resources you have to say, when I measure myself against her, have I really done anything? And it just causes you to look at, what your potential is. So back to what somebody might learn about it or how they might start changing their own game, just look for the stories that are taking place in your school. You're the instructor. You can put it into context, the 9-year-old who goes out and instead of being a bully, defends somebody else from bullying. And that you can bring in and put that experience into context and put that in your portfolio and say, yeah, I can break 6 suspended boards and I've won the world championship. But what's really important about my work is not what I've done. I want to use this experience with this 9-year-old to show what I really do. This is indicative of the work that I want to do in the world, that I'm doing. And this is a more powerful experience and more social proof of why you should bring your child to my school than the fact that I taught the Korean Rock Army or whatever, this person's resume is. Does that make any sense, Rodney?
You're absolutely. While you were saying that, I was, just reminded of a statistic I once saw, and again, I'm not sure how accurate it was, but it was basically showing that 9 out of 10 martial arts schools in the United States that open in the first year close. So 9 out of 10 close in the first year. And would you say that probably the predominant reason is because everything you've been speaking about up until this point is probably things that most people who open a martial arts school don't focus on?
Well, we are in an industry where people, like if you came to me in your town and said, listen, there's no laundry here, I think a laundry would be a profitable thing. I mean, we need it. There's a need for it. And so we would say, well, how much does the equipment cost? And how many loads do we have to do? And do we have any other businesses we can relate to so we can kind of figure it out? And at the end, after we looked at all the details, I would say as the investor, because we both have money, I'd say, I don't see how we're going to get our money back from this. It doesn't, I'd be better off just keeping my money in the bank with simple compounded interest. So I'm going to decline. Or if the numbers dictated that there was a healthy profit to be had and we'd looked at the risks, I'd say, okay, I'll invest in it because it seems like we've done all our homework. We don't do that in the martial arts. People open martial arts schools because they're passionate about it. And they don't look at all the details. They're going to do it in their garage, or they're going to teach for free, or in their backyard, or open a facility. They just want to do it. It's passionate. And there are many, many schools where there's no burden on the school to support the instructor fully because he or she does it part-time after they do law enforcement or engineering or math. And so it's really not a business that you can look at and compare to other businesses necessarily, because people don't open laundries because they're passionate about cleaning other people's undies, But people who are passionate about the martial arts will open schools because they really believe what they're doing. They like it. They like to train. They're looking for a place and people to train with. So I don't know if the same laws apply, but most schools fail because they're underfunded, because the strategy isn't well thought out. And being in a martial arts school is the business of getting and keeping students. So you've got to be able to get them, and you've got to be able to keep them. And if you can't get them and you can't keep them, you're going to struggle.
And also the students that you do have are always your best advertisement. And so coming back to what you've been talking about is if you can create that social proof through the students that you do have, I think by default, a lot of their friends are going to take note and are going to want to be part of the same experience.
Well, I think that the one thing, like sometimes you shift the wheel in your car just a little bit to the right or left, and at first it doesn't seem like any big deal, but down the road you are in a completely different place. I think that this idea of compiling a portfolio of the accomplishments of your students and your staff and yourself, whether it be competitive, a good portfolio would have some stuff in it that's competitive, like we went to the Worlds, this is our results. Then it would have things that parents care about and that affect the community. I mean, our potential is there. We promote respect for self and others. Show me where respect has manifested itself in your community as a result of your teaching. Can you show me some tangible evidence that, because you say you teach respect, but what does that mean? Show me the money. And if instructors simply started compiling a portfolio of the work they do, because compiling a portfolio today is inexpensive. I mean, video's free. Writing is on the line is free. You don't have to spend any money publishing. You can add images. You can write the articles that you wish people would write about you, but you're your own media company. And if you're your own media company, there's only 4 or 5 ways that you communicate. There's the standard way that martial arts schools communicate, which is psychic transmission, which means that I know what we're doing and I see it happen all the time, but I don't tell you. I think you just should know what I'm doing. You know all the benefits of the martial arts because I know it and I'm transmitting it out there psychically. How's that working for you? Doesn't work very well. Then there's the spoken word, the written word, images and modified images, and video. When you communicate what you do to your community, you're either telling them, you're writing about it, which is the most important to the internet, because the internet doesn't recognize spoken word or recognize whether you're posting a picture of a pig or a person, and it doesn't know it's on the video. It only knows what you describe in words. So when you post a picture, the words you use to describe that picture and its context are what the internet sees. So there's the spoken word, the written word, images and modified images that have some way you've put text on it or something that enhances it. And then you have video. And there's no other way that you communicate the benefits of what you do to your community. And so you are your own media company. And doing this portfolio would require the instructor to become proficient at describing what he or she does and why it's important. And a lot of the things that happen in our schools happen to a very small audience. I see that kid's build his confidence. I recognize that he's gone through a new door, and the person he was before is not who he is today. And this is the evidence of that. I see it, the parents see it, a few of the students see it. But, if you learn how to write and talk about it and film it and put it into context as the leader, the sensei, the one who's been there already, then maybe you stand a chance to have 100 other people see it, maybe 1,000, maybe people see it, because most of my clients now come in through video. They see what I've talked about because I have 1,500 videos on YouTube, so they kind of know me before they call me. And likewise, in your community, wouldn't it be great if people knew what you did, what you really did for people, for the community, before they ever came in and asked you about how much your lessons cost, And you can do that today because the ease of putting things on video, the ease of editing, the ease of writing and broadcasting what you do. There's a great book out. It's been out for a few years. It's called Show Your Work. And it's about, using the internet to actually show what you do and using that as your primary sales tool. That's important to us. And so anybody listening to this who starts to compile a project portfolio, like we used to put our newspaper pieces and tournament wins on the wall in frames in our school. Now that wall is we've broken the fourth wall. The whole world can see it. And when I was doing black belt tests with my students and with these other instructors, I said, because our tests are going to be transparent, because we're going to film and document and journal, and people can actually see what we're doing, not only does that hold you to a higher standard, like when the camera's on, you're not going to be picking your nose like you do in private. I mean, you're going to be on your best behavior, right? So the camera affects your behavior because you know other people are watching. It also gives us an opportunity to set a standard. Like, what if we did a test that was so dynamic, that was so meaningful, that schools all over the world saw those things on video or read about them and said, you know what, I'm going to steal that idea. You have an opportunity when you do a black belt test or any rank test, if you make the process transparent, to affect and teach and influence people you'll probably never meet. And I know that we did that in the Ultimate Black Belt Test. Our original website had more than 1 million hits. And we were disseminating ideas that people experimented with and tried. And as a result, things like dietary self-defense and acts of kindness and tests that last longer than a week or a weekend, all these things became kind of status quo in many, many schools across the world. People that I never met were influenced because they were watching what we were doing. And that is a lesson for the instructors teaching today. If people can see what you're doing, if parents who aren't members of your school or don't bring their children can see how you're affecting the lives of children in the community and how their work is affecting other people's lives, and you're a good storyteller and you can really pull it together, you have a much higher chance of signing those students up and having them come to you with a deeper and clearer understanding of what you actually do as compared to what people perceive we do through media and through motion pictures. And, the perception of what martial arts do and what is actually taking place on the floor is often quite different. And we carry the burden of explaining that in a way that gets people that puts people in a position where they can't say no when you ask them to join.
Coming back to you, Tom, considering that you've had to work through all these injuries, and I've actually just had to work through an injury myself. I had 2 bulged discs. One of them impinged on a nerve. I lost a lot of sensation in my right arm. And so I was off the mat for a good few months, and I'm finally getting back onto the mat. Looking back at your training and knowing what you know now, would you have changed anything in the way that you approached your training? If you could go back in time, knowing what you know now, would you change the way that you trained?
Yeah, I think back in the day we didn't know how to train, and so we thought more was better, and more isn't necessarily better. Better is better. So by the time I was 18 or 19 and testing for my black belt, I was already starting to experience some hip discomfort and some minor limitation of movement. But I was so athletic and so strong that I powered my way through it. But I remember going in at about 20 and finally getting an MRI because I was having lower back spasms, and I thought, I must have bulging disc or something. And the doctor said, so you wore hip braces as a kid, right? I said, no. He said, you were in a traumatic accident? I said, no. He said, what did you do to your body? And I had gone through my adolescence doing all this heavy kicking. And, Bruce Lee had this big heavy bag that Bob Wall had given him that was like 300 pounds. Well, every school I went to had a big sand-filled bag that you could hardly move, and I think I kicked telephone poles and I kicked all kinds of immobile objects. There were no water-filled bags at the time. And but no, I didn't realize what that does to a young body, that there's an action for every reaction. And nobody coached me. In fact, even Ernie Reyes, who's I think is a master coach, when I tested for my second degree so many years ago, they didn't let us have water for the entire 8-hour test. And it included a 2-mile run and all this endurance stuff and thousands of push-ups and sit-ups and no water, which is, we all know today, is a way to kill somebody, right? But we didn't know any better. So yeah, I think the methodology, the methods used for training today are probably smarter. There's more information out there. Anybody who goes on a search can probably find good advice, but it wasn't much of it going around when I was a kid. So I would have appreciated rest as much as I did training. I would have known that more isn't better. Well, after I had my hip replaced, my first 2 hips replaced, I asked the doctor, I said, how can I keep this from happening in my own athletes? And he said that he had just finished with a PGA study that he had been involved in. And what the common practice was for golfers was they'd go out and hit 1,000 balls. And he said, they're suffering from shoulder and hip and, all kinds of injuries as a result of this overtraining. And he said the whole gist of the study that he was in was that it isn't the quantity of practice you do, it's the quality of practice, which sounds like common sense stuff, but a lot of athletes don't approach their training that way. But so instead of hitting 1,000 balls in practice, you hit 100 balls, but with absolute, complete mindful focus. Perfectly present in the moment. That was the gist of the study and the advice they were giving coaches and athletes, to be more mindful about the practice. So that would be my primary change, is that, be present in your training. And don't focus on how many you do, but on the quality of those repetitions. And you stand less of a chance of having these overuse injuries in your joints and having to have body parts replaced and having fatigue injuries, And I think that's a lesson for life too, is it's not the quantity of your toys or the income you make, because we all know people who have a lot of toys and a lot of money who are miserable or creating catastrophe around them. It's the quality of your daily life. It's your ability to look at where you're at and what you're doing and appreciate those things and see the sky for what it is and see the stars and to see the people and the gifts that they bring. And easy to say, but very hard to practice, right, Rodney?
Sure, absolutely. Just while you were talking, I mean, that was my experience, right? I mean, nobody ever had that conversation with me. And so one of the things that I try to ensure that all my coaches understand, that it's essential for the coach to have this discussion with the students, about exactly as you've noted. It's not about, the quantity, it's about the quality. It's about how you train. I like the term that you use, mindfulness, as well, which is interesting always to me when people bring that up, because I don't know what you'd call it, crazy enough to do a PhD, and my PhD actually is in mindfulness itself. And so I can appreciate that, and I try to bring that across on the mat with the students. And instead of having these, 2-hour-long classes like we used to have back in the day, all my classes now are 45 minutes. And it's interesting that I actually see people getting much better a lot quicker than they used to back in the day when there were these 2-hour classes.
Yeah, but I think there's a time when, there's a time when you're so full of youth and vigor that being able to outdo everybody else, to lift more, to run faster, to be the last one standing, that is how you approach your life. It's just the nature of the beast. And we could all look at men and women who are at that age level or that level of growth in their journey and understand where they're coming from. And when the student's ready, the teacher appears, is the saying. Nobody could have told me different. How much advice did your dad and mom give you that you just completely blew off until much later when you look back? I think it was Mark Twain who said, or somebody like that, some satirist who said, I was amazing how much my dad had learned when I turned 21 from the time I was, a teenager. You just don't appreciate it. And now looking back, so I don't fault the guys who are, finishing their match and screaming like an animal, and jumping up and doing backflips, and they'll fight their way through any endeavor, because there's just a time in your life when that's your approach. And there are, of course, people who are born with a different awareness. Like some people are born with a good physique, don't have to do anything, and they've just got the six-pack and all the musculature. And most of us don't. We have to work on it if we want that. And some people seem to be born with some mindfulness already in them, like they're an old soul. And so there are exceptions to the rule, but most of us have to go through that phase when fighting is the way we get through it. Like I'm not going to reason my way through this. I'm going to power my way through this. And then it comes a time when you get older, I found, and I don't like to admit to it, but you just have to give into it at some point, where you realize, I can't do that anymore. It's not smart. It's not me at my best. And I have to give in to the fact that, like now I have this broken leg that's all wired together, and that if I break it again, I could have it amputated. And amputation doesn't seem to me to be a viable alternative to living. So I have to adjust around it. And, but now my practice is at learning to adjust. And so there's value in that. There's value in learning to enjoy the process. And I often talk to the people I train with, and I say, listen, you have to control your inner dialogue, especially you older guys, because if you start talking to yourself and saying, I'm not as good as I was when I was 20, or, I'm getting old, or, you'll start to hate what you're doing. And if you're not having fun at what you're doing because you're hard on yourself, you're not going to be here in 3 months or 4 months. You have to take whatever's happening to you and find the good in it and find the positive spin and start enjoying what you can do and what you are capable of, and not focusing on the negative aspect, because it takes the shine off your shoes. And if you're not having fun, you will not have a sustained long-term practice. And if you don't do this for the long term, you don't really extract the benefits from it that you could. There's a lot of benefits of having a long-term, consistent, steady practice. Because, like mindfulness that you mentioned, I don't think mindfulness is a thing. Fitness isn't a thing. You don't get fit and then stay fit without maintaining it. It's a practice. And so being a master teacher, being a good black belt, being a martial artist, this isn't something you are. It's something that involves practice. And so defining what that practice is really important, because you don't want it to be something you do by accident. You want it to be something that's purposeful and intentional. And so my practice is learning to like what I can do in training, and give myself permission to not suffer for what I can't do. And my practice is to give something to somebody every day of value without looking for return. This is around the holidays, so I always teach kids the definition of a mature mind, which is to give without remembering and to receive without forgetting. And so that's what I'm looking for in instructors that I'm coaching. What are your practices? What do they bring to you? And what practices are you encouraging in those people you have an influence with? I think I might have got a little off subject there, Rodney, but please pick it up. And
No. I mean, I love it. I mean, that's exactly where my mind is at as well. And we're reaching the top of the hour. So if people wanted to find out more about you and your consulting and your coaching programs, where could they go on the net to find out more?
Well, as I said, I have 1,500 videos on YouTube. So if you want to hear me, doing my shtick, you can always see me on YouTube. And then at tomcallos.com, websites are something that they're always a work in progress. So you can come there and see what I'm blogging about and journaling. You can find access to my work group, which I call the community. And in Buddhism, for example, there's something called the Sangha, which means community. And the purpose of the community is to strengthen the practice of the individual. And so I used to call my groups something else. I had another business name, but I decided on the community because it's really a community effort. It's not me leading. It's a collaborative, participative thing where we support each other. And we talk about what we're working on, and we learn from each other's mistakes and from our victories. And so you can find my work in the community there at tomcallos.com. And I make myself accessible so that people in the martial arts community, which is really quite small compared to the world's population, can always reach me. And you can find me on Skype and Facebook and Gmail and all that. And Rodney, thanks for the opportunity to talk martial arts.
Well, I was going to say the same thing. I really appreciate you making the time, and hopefully we can do it again soon.
Anytime, and keep practicing. Take care of yourself, and I'll talk to you again next our paths cross.
To find out more about our sponsor, Crazy Monkey, go to crazymonkeydefense.com, or to become a trainer, check out mastercrazymonkey.com. Until the next show, get out there and right hook life.